All right, thanks for having me. This is Orchestrating a Successful AI Initiative on Campus. That's Internet 2's naming. I appreciate it because it's nice and aspirational. It's definitely something that we all want to do. And I want to tell you a little bit about what we at Notre Dame have learned in getting started in our journey and learning from others in higher ed. So let's see here. So this is me. I'm Brandon Rich. I've been with Notre Dame since 2019. I came up through applications and integrations, and our journey to the cloud was a big part of what I've done here over the years. You can find me on LinkedIn. I've got a couple of cloud courses on LinkedIn. If you want to check on those, that would be great. But lately, I've been professionally interested in AI, let's say. One of the things that we did last year was the November 2023 Notre Dame AI Forum, which was a great event that we hosted here on campus. We brought together something like 40, 45 different schools to just talk about where they are in the AI journey, to share knowledge, experiences, the things that they have learned in terms of technology, people, processes, use case, governance. It was a great opportunity to learn from each other, and it's something that we hope to replicate. So you're probably the first in this meeting to hear it. The tentative dates here for the 2024 AI Forum are November 18th through 20th. So pay attention to that. That will come through various channels that hopefully you'll be all on. And one of them that you can pay attention to is this right here. If you scan that QR code or click the link once the slides are shared, you can join the Slack channel that we started around the same time as we started planning that AI Forum. There are about 330 of your colleagues in higher ed in this Slack channel right now, discussing the news of AI, sharing tips on things that they've learned. It's a great place to find the other folks who are working on the same things here and trying to find the value in AI for higher ed. So with that, here is our sort of roadmap for today. It's like Mark Twain said, sorry I didn't have time. Sorry it's such a long presentation. I didn't have time to create a short one. We're going through a roadmap of use cases that we've seen in higher ed and some that we are working on ourselves, and sort of a map of what that can look like for you. We'll get into some of the technical details, talking about what's going on in the LLM landscape. What exactly is this RAG thing that you may be hearing about? What are the services offered by cloud, and what should be in your developer's toolbox? Then we'll get into a little bit the other side of things and how we approach governance, security, privacy, risk, literacy, education, community building. It's all in here. It's a long presentation. I've probably got more slides than I need, but I'm going to try to kind of hit the highlights here for you. And I would love to hear from you through the Q&A feature. If you've got any questions, hopefully we'll get to a point where we can do a little bit of discussion. All right, let's talk about use cases. So coming off the forum and other conversations, we've learned a lot about what our peers are doing in higher ed. So, where to get started, here are some good opportunities. So great example in our midst is the University of Michigan. They've got a lot of foundational capabilities that they've made available to campus through their partnership with Azure and custom development. We've got folks doing, I think the sort of first rung on this ladder for a lot of people is your local AI model sandbox. How do you make chat available to people in a private way? And we're going to talk more about how all these things can be achieved. Same thing happening at Michigan. They've got kind of a three-tier system where they've got this Maisie chatbot that people can get to, but they've also got retrieval augmentation capabilities as well as developer API access. So we know that there's a lot of opportunity in creating custom chatbots around particular domains of data. This is the RAG thing that we're going to talk about, retrieval augmented generation. But a good commercial example of this is with OpenAI's GPTs platform. So if you're a paid member of OpenAI, you can get into that and see what it's like to upload your own documents, give instructions to a chatbot, and come out with something that is sort of bespoke and tailored around a certain use case, able to answer specific questions. So here's an example of how we used the GPTs platform here on campus. We use Talon for our integration platform, and we've got our Talon document vendor. We've got our locally created kind of guidebook on how we use Talon here at Notre Dame. Put that all into a GPT and come up with this Talon advisor. Now, this is great, but of course, the challenge with this is you have to be a paid subscriber to OpenAI. And so, one of the things that we want to figure out in all of this is how do we take capabilities like that and make them more ubiquitous, more accessible to campus? So here's an example of Michigan's chatbot Maisie, and you can see some of the examples of the things that they're using it for. Part of the idea is you make chat capabilities available with data privacy kind of baked in, and then you enable a lot of other use cases. Just think of all the things that you yourself might be doing with Claude or ChatGPT or something like that for code generation, helping you write things, all kinds of examples. I put this note here to say that they've gone beyond just document upload, and they've integrated with campus services like Google Drive, like Zoom, like their LMS and Canvas. So those purpose-built integrations are providing a lot of value for them. So here's a great example of the University of Delaware. They've got years of lecture capture that they've accumulated over time from their homegrown lecture capture system. So they've got a rich repository of transcripts, of slides, of course content that they can put into an AI context. It's actually really sophisticated what they're doing. They're using knowledge graphs. I highly recommend that you look into it if you've got context over there. I'll give you some pointers to that in a minute. But it's really sophisticated. And what I like about what they're doing is instead of just making a chat bot, like we're going to create Professor so-and-so as an AI, they have distilled this down to certain capabilities they want to put into Canvas. So you can get lecture summaries, you can ask about certain topics, you can get flashcards to help you study. And I feel like that's a good kind of hedge against the risk of hallucinations to kind of have that specific form factor that's not quite so broad. So you can see here how they're planning to put it directly into Canvas. There's actually an upcoming webinar about this, I think next week, that I might be able to share with folks. This is good, just sort of ground level enablement. Both Delaware and ASU spoke about how they are collecting community prompts to kind of create a shared repository of what staff and faculty and other users are finding valuable as they're prompting AI models. So, there's a lot that you can do just in context with prompts. It's a good resource to give to people. Web accessibility is a good use case. Think of the challenge I know that we have with making sure that all of our images on the web have alt text. That's something where if you can provide and prompt people with pre-generated captions, then it makes it that much easier to fill those things in. So I also saw recently Arizona State did the same thing. And if that's something that you can put into an API and make it available in any place that people are uploading content, you can make a real dent in accessibility challenges. That's a cool use case. Transfer articulation. We have, as I'm sure a lot of you do, a lot of processes around how we bring in transfer students and analyze their incoming transcripts, and in this case, syllabi. So we have a very manual, intensive process where people need to read these syllabus documents. They all look very different. And we want to understand what their mode of instruction was so that can inform the transfer decision. That is something that is a great use case for AI. We've had a lot of success in pointing that at Claude to Bedrock and getting it to do that analysis for us. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. I think advising actually is a great opportunity in general for AI. Just think about the challenge it is to kind of do the technical decision-making of what credits you have and what different directions you can go, and cross-reference that with the class schedule. That's all stuff that if we can automate it, we can make a lot more time for the really valuable conversations that advisors have with their advisees that are about more than just the nuts and bolts of their degree plan. So I'm interested in those sorts of things. Of course, we've got developer assistants, GitHub Copilot being probably the most prominent, and they're going in some really interesting directions, trying to get to a point where they have agents that can take a look at an issue in GitHub and make a plan as to how it's going to tackle it, and actually make code changes across multiple files and send you a pull request, which is fascinating. We've seen an example of something called Devin, which made the rounds recently, claiming to do the same thing. I think all these tools, are somewhat limited, but they're going to get better and better. And just we know from experience that getting an LLM to step-by-step plan is a good way to get good results. So there's a little bit here, just ideas of how you can put a lot of these different services behind an API. things that we have played around with as we look into how we enable more and more use cases with direct access to different models. That's really just a concept right now, but that kind of centralized access has a lot of benefits. Now, Michigan, as kind of leaders in the space, they have done something similar to that, and they are enabling a lot of use cases directly for developers accessing models through API. If you want to learn more about those specific use cases that I just brought up, 3 leaders from those schools, Don Lambert, Jefferson Burson, Aaron Sikaranza, I had the pleasure of leading a panel with them about a month or 2 ago in Chicago. Thank you again to Internet too. That's on YouTube. I would recommend you check it out. They'll talk a lot more in depth about those use cases. All right, so you're sort of starting from scratch, right? A lot of schools are trying to figure out where do we go from here. Well, you saw in some of those examples, kind of where can you go? All right, you got coding assistants, you got workspace assistants, chatbot. These are the things that sort of have immediate, return on investment. People are going to be able to start using those and getting value and being creative and thinking of different ways to use them. So when you're talking about AI enablement, and that's what we want to do. We're not going to come up with all the use cases just from central IT or wherever you're at. We want to provide the tools in the environment that let people be creative. Those are 3 ways that you can kind of enable that really quickly, potentially. Retrieval augmented generation, chatting over documents, having bespoke chatbots is another way to do that. API access opens up even more. These 2 together, along with, one thing that's maybe not listed here, which is tuning of models, is something that lets you go kind of even further and explore new use cases beyond what you might just get on a platform. Now, this is just a snippet of a little exercise I did last night, trying to kind of map out, what are the possible ways you can traverse this whole thing? And I put this into a lucid chart, and I'll just take you down one of the paths here to kind of show you what I was trying to think about in this chart here. So let's say you want to do a private chat bot, right? How do you actually do that? We have all the arrows. You got multiple options here. You want a chat bot that, can talk to powerful LLMs, but is keeping your data private. Well, you've got SaaS options. You could go buy ChatGPT Teams or Enterprise for all a part of campus. You could use Google Gemini. You could use kind of Microsoft tools. You could go more the platform route using something like AWS Bedrock Studio, which just came out yesterday, Azure AI Studio. You can go the OSS, open source route, things like LibreChat, which provide a great front end to language models. There's a nice open source project from AWS. Probably a lot more things that you could list here. This is just a kind of a snapshot of what's going on. And of course, you can build it, and that expands to a whole big section here, because then you have a lot more things to think about. How do you get to your foundational models? You can do that through API access. So if you have a license to OpenAI or to Claude, you can go directly to them. You can go the self-hosted route, take open models that are available like Llama or Gemma or Mistral models. You can run those on your own infrastructure at significantly inflated costs. Or you could go through a cloud provider. And a lot of the value that we're getting out of the cloud providers right now is their ability to kind of operate at scale and pass on those savings to us, letting us get to powerful models like Claude on a per token cost basis rather than needing to run the really expensive infrastructure. And you can see from some of the lines here, Llama being an open model from Meta, it's available on all these services, but they've all got things that are kind of unique to them. The only place you can get Gemini, of course, is at Google at GCP, and Azure's got their agreement with OpenAI. So, where do you get your models? You got to think about vector databases. We'll talk a little bit about what these things are. But you have options here. So I was trying to just map out some of the choices. And that will be shared as well. All right, let's dig into it a little bit. What is in the LLM chatbot landscape? Now, a lot of these things you've probably heard of, are familiar with, so I won't dwell on them too much. Let's talk, though, first about what are some of the key attributes you should know about language models. The context length is sort of the amount of working memory that a language model has. When you're typing a question into any chatbot, that's going into its context, but it's really good for other things like adding document context or maintaining the memory of a chatbot. The size, we hear about parameters. I feel like we're already hearing less and less about the size of models. In fact, we're hearing more about smaller models that are able to run on less powerful infrastructure while still maintaining really good results. But that's one kind of parameter. of model abilities right now. Bigger has tended to be better, but I feel like we're hitting diminishing returns. Knowledge cutoff, you've seen this when you're working with things like ChatGPT. It'll tell you, I don't really know anything past November 2023. And that's something that gets updated regularly. License, is it a proprietary model, or is it something free out in the open that you can just download and use? And then how do you actually get to it? So you saw that in the graph a minute ago. Is it something you can run yourself? Is it through a vendor API? Is it through SaaS? So things to think about. Oh yeah, the other note here is a lot of these open models tend to be released with multiple parameter sizes, so you can run them at sort of different levels of compute requirements. So you've got OpenAI, of course. Their foundational models are the GPT family. 3.5 Turbo runs the free version, GPT-4 if you're paid. They're accessible through OpenAI directly or through Azure. The subscription levels are pretty interesting here. Really the one thing I want to point out right here is ChatGPT Pro, the paid individual version. In all cases, you need to be thinking about how your data is used. If you are not paying for the AI tool that you're using, you're probably paying for it by giving up the rights to your data. There's an insatiable need for more data right now for AI models to train on. They've already consumed basically the whole internet. So where does new content come from? Well, one place is it comes from us typing our little questions and giving feedback. The thing to note is just because you start paying doesn't mean you are absolved from that. ChatGPT Pro, the individual version, still does consume your data. You've got to get up to ChatGPT Teams or Enterprise to get agreements in terms that say we will not train on your data. So that's important to know. Anthropic was formed from folks that left OpenAI a number of years ago. They've got very powerful models in the Claude family. The latest releases are in 3 different sizes, and Opus is the most powerful and is behind their paywall. This is a multimodal model, meaning you can upload documents, you can upload pictures, but unlike OpenAI, which does image generation with DALL-E, Claude does not. Let's see, Microsoft. So recently I would have said they don't really have foundational models, but they have started development. They've just released this 5.3 small open model, and they are working on a big one. Kind of makes you wonder if they weren't rattled a little bit by all the leadership shakeups at OpenAI and thought maybe we ought to work on charting our own course that doesn't rely so much on OpenAI. But we'll see where that goes. They've got their productivity suite that ties into Office 365 and all that they call Copilot. And Bard is their chatbot. Google used to have, and still does, I suppose, a model called Palm, but they've upgraded that and replaced it with the Gemini family of models, 1.5 Pro. I believe being the most powerful. I'm the least familiar with these, and there are a lot of different ones. And their productivity suite that integrates with Google Drive and Google Docs and all that is called Duet. Now, you might be going, hey, wait a minute. Is that really what it's called still? Well, foundational model was called Gemini. Duet was their name for the workspace integration, Bard for chatbot. And in their infinite naming wisdom, they decided we need another Gemini and another Gemini, and it makes it really hard to talk about Google stuff. But they're all Gemini. Everything is Gemini. We'll peek at open models here. We just mentioned 5.3, the long models. Say what you will about Meta or Facebook, and I certainly have in the past. I'm really impressed with how they are approaching their open models. They truly are open. They're available everywhere. Whereas an open model like Gemma, even if it shows up on a repository like Hugging Face, is still not going to probably appear on AWS Bedrock, for instance. They're keeping a few of those cards close to their chest, but Llama and all those from Meta are just everywhere, and it's really cool to see. Mistral is a French company. Their models are over the place. 8x7 was interesting because it's a slightly different architecture for the LLM called a mixture of experts model, where you kind of different little brains that handle different kinds of queries and collaborate. So this chart is definitely out of date, but it just shows you that when you're looking at these models, you have kind of a heterogeneous landscape of where you get access to it. So it's good to kind of try to keep track of what models you can get where, and it makes services that kind of broker all this stuff all the more valuable. There's something called Open Router that's meant to be sort of oops, I lost my screen here. Give me 1 second. I bumped my cable and I'm resharing. Yeah, Open Router is an API that purports to give you access to basically everything. I haven't delved a lot into it lately, but is a very interesting concept that I would like to explore. All right, I've mentioned RAG a few times. I've got a thing here I like to call it RAG in 2 minutes. What is going on? All right, so we talked about the context window. When you type a question to ChatGPT, prompts go in the context. How does photosynthesis work? The thing is, you've chatted with ChatGPT in the past and you've been amazed at how it remembers the conversation. You can have a back and forth with it. That is all an illusion. Every single time you chat or say anything to ChatGPT or other language models, they have no memory of what's going on. It's an illusion that is achieved by placing your Q&A history or a summary of it into the prompt, into that context, kind of invisibly, like it's pasted right before your latest question. So that's one way that the context is used. But remember, what goes in the context, each one of those words is a token, and we often get charged by the token. And another usage of the context is anytime that you upload a document or an image or any additional data into the prompt, that's also going to the context. The context is really valuable. It's like a person. If I hold up a page and with writing on it in front of your face, you're going to pay the most attention to what I've just kind of put front and center for you. That's how an LLM works with its context. You're holding up that information saying, pay attention to this first. And so in this case, I put Michigan's Gen AI committee report there, and I can ask it to summarize. So to understand RAG, the next thing that you need to know is, what is an embedding model? And they're really interesting and it's worth checking out, but essentially they turn text into numbers, and those numbers allow us to make connections between concepts. If you have your entire knowledge base and it's a ton of documents, too big for any one context window, you can chunk those all up, divide it out, run through embedding model, get numbers out, and shove those in what's called a vector database. So now you have your knowledge base as a numerical representation. Somebody asks you a question. Do the same embedding transition to numbers, and go to your vector database and say, hey, vector database, which of those numerical representations of my knowledge base are most similar to this prompt? And it'll pull those out for you in, again, plain English. And you can put all that into the context window along with your chat history and the latest prompt and get an actual response. So when people say RAG, if you were afraid to ask, that is what that means. And of course, it means that data strategy is essential. We really, really need to have good data. All right, let's fly through cloud services for a second. I'm most familiar with AWS, but here's Azure AI services. They've got a great reputation, heard really good things, and would love to explore that more. Google's is called Vertex AI. And here's the AWS ML AI stack. So they've got all these services that they've had for years that are sort of applying machine learning or AI. And then they've got things like SageMaker here, which is a whole set of ML tools for developers. In terms of AI specifically, you've got Bedrock. That's that API access to foundational models, including Claude, which is a great competitor to OpenAI. So it makes it very useful. SageMaker, where you have a lot of capabilities, but for our purposes, allows you to host local models on your AWS infrastructure. And Amazon Q, which is the console integrated chat, which works sort of in an iffy way. But what is really nice is the RAG as a service capabilities that they're starting to roll out, where you can build those bespoke chatbots a little bit like OpenAI's GPTs. Let's see here. So an example of how we used or are planning to use some of the AWS stack. I mentioned that syllabus processing earlier. I can take all those PDFs from an S3 bucket, use Textract, one of those services, to pull the text off the PDFs, run those through a query to Bedrock, which proxies to Claude 3, and then I can send those on to our registrar's office. So that's just one example of how we're pulling those things together. All right, I can see we're out in time, so I'm going to just give you the highlights here. What's in the developer toolbox? We'll talk about SageMaker and Bedrock. This is a good example of just the cost difference once you move to per token inference, rather than running, this is a Harvard example. They ran one of their proofs of concept on SageMaker, which means your own infrastructure, pay as you go, and ran up to 17,000 a month. I don't know what the token usage was, but when they went to Bedrock and were paying by the token, it's much more cost effective. So you want things that work like that. Your developers need to understand about LangChain, specifically Llama Index. There's a thing called semantic kernel. These are all frameworks for working with language models in your favorite languages, specifically here Python and C#.NET. So if you're going the build route, these will definitely be things that you want to look into. Vector databases are where you store those numerical representations of data. So done proofs of concept in different ones of these. Some of these are SAS, Chroma you can run locally. And a lot of that capability is also making its way, or has already been, in traditional relational databases, where you can do sort of vector operations now and things like Postgres. You should know about Hugging Face. I think it's huggingface.co or maybe .com. It's sort of the GitHub for AI ML models. So all those open models can be found here. And as people make their own little variations on them, you will find that at Hugging Face. And they have Python libraries that they maintain that help you interact with those things. So definitely something developers should check out. A big point I want to make with this slide, though, is that all this stuff is really coming down to the level of traditional just IT skills. Higher ed IT, we know how to do integrations, we know how to do web applications, and we know how to interact with APIs. And so when these models are available to us with just API calls, that means that part's really taken care of. And we can start building useful things on top of it with just our traditional web skills. So here's ASU's model comparison tool. They did exactly that. They built it from the ground up. But even now, this kind of functionality is available through AWS and through Azure and other platform holders. So, if you've waited a bit, you're not behind. You may be at a great point to catch up as these services become more commoditized and platformized. Same thing with integrations. And just like I showed you in that previous slide, if you can call out and get a meaningful response in a data pipeline, great. It's kind of invisible AI is a good place to get value. Developers should also know about this thing called Ollama. Ollama just runs on a command line and lets you download local models. Those small models, it's a great way to try them out. So I sort of pitted it against my MacBook Pro to see how well it would do. And I was able to get some of these smaller models working and try out little things. Let's get them to write haikus. Let's see how well these ones, small models actually perform. Llama 2 failed to get the syllabi right on, or not syllabi. I've lost the word for never mind. This is the part we'll have to edit out. What's the word for it's not syllabi. Somebody tell me in the Q&A because it's left my brain. Ollama also will open up a local API on a port, which is pretty cool. So if you're trying to do a proof of concept of an application, that's a way to do it right there. And it will do streaming tokens as well. You've probably seen, when you're interacting with a chat bot, it's streaming those words to you, which is a great feedback mechanism. You're not sitting there looking at your watch while it comes up with an answer. So if you want to replicate the same thing, you need to interact with streaming APIs. Syllable. Syllable. All right. The other cool thing about Ollama is that you can actually zero out all the randomness and get reproducible outputs, which is a cool thing. Language models are actually deterministic. They will give you the same answers if you can make all the randomness kind of flatten out. All right. Let's pivot a little bit from tech and talk about governance. If you're on campus, everybody's trying to figure out how do we bring AI capabilities to campus. Some of that is going to be through open source or building things. Some of it's going to be partnerships with your vendors, and you've got to kind of figure out what is your approach going to be. So one of the ways that a lot of schools are doing that is by creating a campus task force. Here at Notre Dame is a cross-disciplinary group of individuals from all aspects of the university. And you can see similar things going on here at Michigan, at Cornell, ASU is going. You can see where some of my touch points have been, schools that are really doing well here. I'd very much recommend you chase down the Michigan report, the the Cornell reports. They're very in-depth, and if you're pursuing something similar, they're great benchmarks to kind of see where folks are going. And we've just released ours as well at ai.edu. Here's how we structured our AI task force. So it was co-chaired by our CIO and VP of research, and included students, folks from general counsel, the provost's office, several faculty members, enterprise architecture, academic standards. So that's of course, key stakeholder when you're thinking about academic integrity with students using AI, academic deans, senior IT leaders from central IT, communications folks, and research computing. So this was a good swath of campus to start to make some decisions. Now, we came up with these kind of three concentric circles, not concentric, overlapping circles of enterprise and administration, research and scholarship, teaching and learning. And they all have their recommendations. Our overarching recommendations revolve around AI literacy and skills development. That is very much something that's in demand from both students and faculty, is the need to understand these tools. And so we've got initiatives around that. Number two kind of points to the reality of, the funding challenges that a lot of schools face across the board in this space, especially as identifying the necessary human and financial resources to enable all these recommendations. And different schools are finding different ways to approach that, which we'll talk about more in a moment. I'll zoom in here on our enterprise and administrative recommendations. We need a process and guidelines for the adoption of AI tools. I'll get into that. We need to review and update policies, provide secure access to AI tools that protect our data, and establish a consulting and acceleration team to help out with all the many use cases that are popping up. Go to genai.umich, check out what they're doing at Michigan. They have a great philosophy around their approach to focus on equitable access. It's great. At ASU, they're very oriented around their mandate, the campus mandate. One of the things that drives is they want AI to kind of be a part of everything, and they really made a commitment to that. So a lot of really cool stuff going on at ASU. All right, so once you get into the point where, and you're probably already there, where people are coming at you with requests to purchase services, turn on AI capabilities, you're going to want to start assessing risk and figuring out how you do make those approval decisions. And we're in the midst of this right now. You got to assess your risk and your opportunities. So I've got a little template here that I created of, kind of how to make recommendations on certain ones of these tools. So I've got a little summary, opportunities and benefits, risks and mitigation. This is an area, of course, where there's a lot of, potential concern from folks about what these AI tools are doing. This is where AI literacy comes in, where we as technology folks can help kind of dispel some of the myths around how AI works, but we still have to address existing and novel risks that are associated with AI. So in this document and some others, I kind of took some things that we got from our risk officer and our risk folks and tried to explain, in a little bit of technical terms, how these things work, how serious these risks are, and what are some possible mitigations. We get into usage of institutional data, link to those terms for our InfoSec and General Counsel folks to review, a bit about the cost model and ROI, and recommendations along with what this recommendation would actually cost. So that is one way of kind of getting into a pipeline. Of course, right now, I think we have a lot of AI-enabled tools, and this intersects with software purchasing on campus. There's a lot of commonalities, and eventually these two circles are going to become one circle. And so as you're thinking about how do we deal with bringing AI capabilities on campus, look to your existing processes. Assessing AI is not actually that different from evaluating SaaS. You're going to do the same due diligence that you've always done about data handling. You're going to involve the same folks, InfoSec, General Counsel, your campus data stewards, procurement. So when you're trying to get started, I would say, this is what we're doing. Pick a tool that has wide impact. Use that as the basis for future reviews. So we're starting with low-hanging fruit in the form of Zoom AI because we've already got that agreement, and ChatGPT Teams, which is new for us and also opens up a lot of data questions because people can kind of put anything into it. It's forcing us to confront all kinds of questions that, yes, they are intrinsic to things that we've always done in SaaS, but they're bubbling up uniquely in the AI world. And if we get through this, I kind of feel like we can get through anything, and that will help us to speed future approvals. You can see from the EDUCAUSE 2024 AI landscape study, a great resource here. A lot of people agree with that. Existing policies are being revised and some new policies being created, but existing policies can guide you to a large extent here. Now, what actually is different? I mean, the thing is, it's not that it's completely the same. There's some questions that you have to ask that are unique to AI. So you want to know what models are being used. Are they self-hosted by the vendor, or are they using a third-party API? Because your vendor themselves might be calling out to, OpenAI. So given that, what additional terms might govern the data handling if it's being passed off to a third party? What's the scope of the data sent to the AI? Sometimes this is not transparent. Even GitHub Copilot, you kind of think, well, is it just the open file? Is it the files next to me? They're giving you more controls over that lately, but increasingly as AI is baked into our tools, you don't exactly know what data is being sent over. So we just got to ask them. At the bottom of all this, we have to rely on our agreements with our vendors, just like we always have. We've got to read the fine print. We got to talk to them. We got to redline stuff, and we've got to come to a point of trust in our partners, and with the processes that we use to do that. You want to know, crucially, are they using any data to enhance or train models? Because you don't want your institutional data popping up even inadvertently somewhere. We've seen that LLMs can be induced to spit out training data. It's extremely random and rare. And so I would never really, at least at this point, be concerned that somebody could specifically target, some training data that they want, but, it's a possibility. So that's a key pivot point for how we think about this stuff. And it makes us more stringent on our guidelines. What's the retention policy for AI inputs? And what's the ownership, ultimately, of the output and the input? We don't want to give up rights to anything. Let's see. With some of those decisions made, this is a mock-up, but I would love to see something like this for folks on campus. Like, hey, here's something we've reviewed. Does it train your data? No. Like, here are links to relevant, here's how it uses the data. How do I know what kind of data I'm using? That is such a big question. This graphic is saying, hey, it's a mock-up. You can use this tool for public data, good, internal data, sensitive, highly sensitive. These are our classifications, and you probably have your own. But then the question is, do people know what kind of data that they're holding when they think about using it with an AI tool? So we got to make sure that we equip people to understand the classification of the data. So that's just a communication and change management effort. All right, I'm going to peek at the Q&A real quick here. Let's see. Thank you, Kayla. Syllable. Let's see. What particular departments or business functions are organizations prioritizing their AI initiatives for? So every one of them, basically. One of the things that I've seen a lot of schools doing is trying to create that repository of AI use cases. And in fact, we had a recent conference with Internet 2 and a number of schools. One of the conclusions of which is that we need to create our own repository of use cases that are showing value and connections to who's working on these things. That is something I'm involved in along with some others. It's just getting started, but we would really like to build that repository so we can answer that question, not just broadly, but specifically say, hey, like, here's where we're actually seeing things work. Okay, here's a question about how much does it take in terms of staffing to run an AI initiative successfully? That's a great question. I get to that a little bit later, but the answer is it's kind of unknown. There are not a lot of officially created AI groups in higher ed campuses that I know yet. I think it's starting to happen. You have these few outliers, like ASU is huge. They've got a huge, priority investment on this. So they've got a giant team. University of Michigan did everything that they did initially. I could be talking out of turn here, but I think with 2 developers, they really accomplished a lot early on with a small group, and they've expanded out from there. A lot of places are doing this stuff ad hoc, but the more that you can show value and make that sort of governance and stewardship case that like we're doing here, the more you make the case to make the investment in resources and staffing. How can we show leadership that an LLM tool subscription can improve the productivity of cloud IT teams? Oh, that's such a good question. I think everybody is searching for the metrics that can let them prove out ROI. And I think in some respect, we're still searching for that. We've got to find, I suppose it's like you do with any application. How do you show that an app that automates your financial processes has an ROI? Well, you look at what you're doing beforehand, and you factor in the cost of that tool, and you figure out what have we saved in terms of processes, in terms of hours spent, in terms of freeing up people's time, or in terms of reducing the number of mistakes or sit reps that come out of that process. It's the kind of thing that we're constantly struggling to do, is to show value. I think with each novel use case that has an expenditure to it, you do need to identify some metrics that you can measure before and after to actually show what the value is. Because this could easily be, a sink of funds, and we've got to show there's a positive impact, and I think it is there. All right, closing the chat for a moment. All right, so we're talking about literacy, education, and community. Everybody needs something like this, although I feel like we're probably all replicating the same materials. But you do need resources for your campus, for students, for staff and faculty. And here are 3 good examples at schools I mentioned: ASU, Michigan here at the top, and Harvard. Here at Notre Dame, we've got a working group stood up for AI literacy, and we are working on this kind of stuff right now. You've got communities popping up all over the place. This is out of our teaching center, our sort of pedagogy center called the Canham Center. A friend of mine, Alex Ambrose, has created this series where he's targeting faculty, teaching in the age of AI. And they did several sessions over the last several months to get people talking and learning. We've stood up communities of practice. So I run these 2, the AI community of practice and the developer interest group. Started out as one thing, but it was clear early on that needed to be a little bit more focused. So we've got the user focus, where we talk about tools and prompting and learning how people are using AI, and developer focus, which is more on the builder side. Those are monthly meetings. This is a list that I put together just of the groups that I know about, and there are probably more at Notre Dame that are persistent in talking about AI. We've got an AI policy working group that's in central IT to kind of triage our current influx of AI requests. Generative AI task force, that's the big one with the strategy purpose. AI for teaching and learning comes from the provost office. The digital literacy group I just mentioned. Those 2 communities of practice, something from Indie Learning, and this one is faculty led, lean into AI. The university writing program, those people have a vested interest in figuring out how to engage with AI. So one of the things that we're really interested here, and I think everybody should be, is identifying these groups and trying as much as possible to get them collaborating, talking, and making sure that they can help and build on each other's work. Because there are a lot of people having these conversations, and as central IT, we can definitely help to facilitate and unify those. All right, so the question was about organization and resources. Here are my thoughts. Most schools are not centrally funding AI tools yet. So where are the costs? It's people, and it's subscriptions, and it's runtime, and it's compute. We're seeing folks do pilots, and we're doing some pilots. Even the schools that are really putting money into this, ASU has famously their agreement with OpenAI for enterprise. And I know that, if you work with them, you can get some good terms from them. But they're a huge school, and they've got a fixed number of paid accounts that they can hand out, which is why I didn't grab a screen of this, but they've got a really great approach where they're doing kind of a campus-wide pitch challenge. Pitch us on an AI idea, something you want to use the paid version of OpenAI and GPT's platform to do, and we'll select and make those available. So it's made this really great it's generated excitement, and it's something they've been able to show back to campus how they're generating value from AI, because they're pulling the people that are actually interested in diving in and doing it. And then as those surface the value that they come up with, that creates this flywheel of interest. And that gets to the next bullet. Start small, get your pilot groups, have a plan for what comes next. Those pilots can help generate the use cases that turn into actual project proposals, budgetary proposals. A lot of what we're doing right now, it starts from these small ideas, but they're still going through our campus stewardship process, because the money is not just being dropped on us for, oh, AI is cool, here's a lot of money. No, we're gonna allocate funds the same way that we always do. We find the things that are valuable to our campus partners and find the champions in those areas and get them to help us through the prioritization process. That's been a big thing for us lately, is stewardship and governance, and so it's no different with AI. Let's see. So find your low effort, high return on value, return on investment use cases, because those are the ones that you're going to be able to prove out. The things that you can do on a laptop or just in an AWS account that you spin up, with a very small budget. You can find, somebody's going to say, okay, I'll give you a couple $100 to experiment a while. And that's going to give you some time, like this syllabus thing. We just did that with a pointer to Bedrock, and now that's turning into a whole big project. Find those small ways to win. What are things you can give to campus? Like AI Companion. That was not a huge stretch for us being Zoom customers already. How can you empower people to use even the public version of Chat GPT? There's a lot that you can get people doing that are show value. So generate your support on campus through those communities of practice, get people talking, thinking, brainstorming. We had AWS here on campus recently, and we invited folks from our student services, our research computing, provost, different areas, functional areas. And our AWS partners guided us through kind of a brainstorming session, and they connected that to the tools and the capabilities on AWS AI services. So each of those things can kind of plant a seed for something that can gain support and resource and funding. Let's see. Yeah. So a lot of these organizations are still grassroots. So I say, start going. Don Lambert at Michigan, I talked to him a year ago. I'm like, man, how did you do this stuff? He goes, you just start from the bottom, like get your grassroots groups going, create the community practice. And so I just did that. I threw a meeting out there to all go IT, and people just started to show up, and then you kind of have to keep that going. So then you find your volunteers, and you get your planning committees going, and you just kind of continue and let it snowball. Collaboration with other schools, just like what you're doing here. Internet 2, we thank you for facilitating conversations like these. EDUCAUSE does this as well. And the Slack that I showed you earlier, I'll show you that QR code again in a minute. That's a great opportunity to connect to people and build the network. We're trying to create those communities in higher ed right now because we are all heading in the same direction, trying to solve the same problems. Let's do it together. The last is lean on your existing vendor relationships. I mean, here's a picture of some of those. ASU is working with AWS, so is Delaware. We are, of course, at Notre Dame. The Michigan stuff is powered by Azure. And it's not just, we're logging in, we're using their services. We're partnering with them to discover those places where they can bring additional resources to bear, whether it's people or training or credits. It depends on the relationship and the pitch that you can make to them. But I think all these folks are really eager, even OpenAI, to get into higher ed and to understand what it takes to be successful in this unique market. And they're looking for ways to show that and to show that they can be partners to us so that they can build on that for future success. So that's to our benefit. Go find your reps and talk to them about what you can do. All right, my last section, you can kind of look at your leisure, but this is a lot to keep up with here. And so I've just kind of collected some of my favorite things. This is a good foundational one from Wolfram Alpha. What is ChatGPT doing? How's it work? Or why does it work? It's a little technical, but it's a good kind of place to start. NVIDIA has great blogs and little explainers and learning paths for developers, administrators. Highly recommended there. Deeplearning.ai. If you want to take a developer who's a web or integration developer, someone who knows how to script things, whatever, and upskill them into an AI developer, this is the place. 1 to 2 hour courses. They are all free. The short courses at any rate. It's a Jupyter notebook side by side with a video. It's all free. You can interact with models live as you're taught. It's so cool. They've got dozens of those classes right now. LangChain I mentioned is one that's got a series on there. All kinds of stuff. If you've heard about it, it's probably on deeplearning.ai. The Rundown and the Neuron are 2 daily newsletters, really good for keeping up on the news, as is being in our Slack. And I like this one. It's a Substack or a Medium, Data Machina. This is a good one to subscribe to for the really nerdy stuff, to keep up on the research papers that are coming out, the new architectures, all kinds of things. There was one a while back that was sort of on how people are tackling and classifying hallucinations and the risk around that. Different things on, advanced RAG patterns, just anything that's happening in research. If it turns up on archive, there's going to be some explainer about it here in Data Machina. Highly recommended. So here's some examples from deep learning. Definitely go check those out. They partnered with AWS for a Coursera course. This is a longer one. It's like, it says 16 hours. You can power through it if you feel like it. but it gives a really, really good technical foundation for how LLMs work, and is a little bit more technical than most things you would find. It talks about, how models are trained, and even down to the level of like quantization, how smaller models are made, and but it also gives you the big picture, and has a great little kind of framework for the AI application development process. This guy's great. You probably heard of him, Ethan Mollick, Wharton School. He has this blog called One Useful Thing. He writes a ton about AI, and he has just released this book, Co-Intelligence, Living and Working with AI. I am just a few pages into it, but yeah, good follow on places like LinkedIn. The Practical AI Podcast, I credit Elizabeth Riley at ASU for bringing this one up to me. This is a long-running podcast. They're on episode, 200 something. And this most recent one, they talked with the creator of LibreChat. That's that open source front end that I mentioned earlier. So a lot of good stuff on that podcast. The EDUCAUSE AI landscape study I mentioned. So here's the link to that. Can give you a good sense of the temperature of what's going on in higher ed. And, oh yeah, the AI Forum 2023. You can get to the slides from here. I'll hold on that for a second if you want to scan it. So a lot of these schools I've mentioned and more have presentations that they made available through the AI Forum. So a lot of good resources there. All right, I'm about to hit the button. We will share the slides. And of course, one more time, I'll stand for the Slack here. A lot of good discussion. Would love to see you all join up there and talk about what you're doing. All right. I cannot believe, y'all, that was over 100 slides. So that was a lot. Let's see, there's something else in the Q&A here. AI appears to have a huge learning curve in terms of executing the AI initiative. How is your institution enabled the human resource side of things? Let's see. So the human resource side of things. So I assume that gets to sort of the organizational question, which I know we talked about a little bit there. Here at Notre Dame, after the release of the AI report, I know that some of those key stakeholders and leadership got together and tried to figure out, okay, what do we have in terms of staff positions or funding that we can make available for this, and that's all kind of coming together now. But that's how it's happening at Notre Dame. I think some places are going to say, okay, like we're all in on this. Here are the positions. Here's the group that we're going to kind of bless and hire for, and others it's going to have to come up more organically. And it's definitely what's happening here, and I think in a lot of places.
Okay. Ananya, did you have a question before? We're almost at time, so maybe a couple more questions.
I just wanted to ask like one question, and this is more on the, again, on the organizational, side of things. Hi, Brandon. And my question is, so for example, at Notre Dame or any organization that wants to start some kind of AI initiative at different levels, or, somebody just starting out, what are some considerations that you would think they have to keep in mind? Like, for example, use cases might be one, like, you cannot address all at once. You probably have to pick something small before you go about addressing a lot of them. So some of those considerations, would you go over some of those things to keep in mind?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that this can easily be extremely overwhelming because you could go so many routes. That's kind of what I tried to draw in that picture earlier, and with some of the use cases there. I think the thing to do is to start in two ways. One is to sort of find those small low-hanging fruit opportunities. Some of those may be like, we're just going to add a call out to a language model, just like in that syllabus example. Like, it's basically a data integration pipeline, but it's got this one thing that it does. And it doesn't cost a lot because it doesn't call out very much. It doesn't use a lot of tokens, a very fixed, amount of money, which is one of the things that kind of scares people. Like, oh, AI initiative means that we're just like, we're setting money on fire, right? Because it's chat and it's tokens everywhere and it costs a lot. And we don't know how to measure ROI. Like, why should we get into this? So you start showing value in those smaller cases. And with, I think then you have to focus on foundational capabilities. We can tell people and we can talk to people about how to use ChatGPT effectively, but until we can tell them that it's okay to use institutional data, it's hard to really, apply that very directly to their work. So that's why you see schools starting like, we're gonna spend time to figure out the sandbox thing first. And that is a little bit of risk because you don't know what those costs are going to be like. I can tell you anecdotally, at least what I've heard from one school is that they made it available to a lot of folks, and the uptake on it was about 10% of the people that they communicated to. And as a result, and by making the model selector default to the cheapest model, they had actually fairly manageable cost. Now, that's obviously unbounded, and you could get slammed at any time, but it gives you a way to start. And as you build up, like if you want to talk to people about practical use cases, you've got a place to send them to try things out, and you've got resources that you can tap into to build AI capabilities into other places. So start with the small use cases, start with the sort of foundational enabling technologies, and start with the community is the third thing. Like, we started having communities practice, practically still are, before we have those foundational capabilities. We are working on it, but you can start talking about AI because secret, everybody's using it already anyway. So you might as well be having the conversations and be talking about responsible use and dispelling the FUD and increasing the literacy on campus. And that will help create the conversation that makes opportunities for actually applying things to our work.
Great. Thanks for that, Brandon. Actually, we are at time, but I do have one quick question for you. You listed a whole series, a whole bunch of resources, and I wonder if within those communities, if there's been talk about creating perhaps a playbook that addresses some of the legal, ethical, governance issues around this AI initiative discussion.
That is a good question. So on the Internet 2 conversation, actually, there's a lot of talk about how do we stop having duplicative effort. And contract review is one place, and we know that Internet 2 has a lot of capabilities there, and the community does as well. Legal, it's interesting because that came up in this conversation, and I feel like that would be useful. I just read something from this morning from one of our partners, Tambellini does contract reviews, all kinds of ways to help and collaborate on this. But in that conversation in Denver, everybody said, yes, but our lawyers are still going to want to look at it. So like what we need is a springboard. Like, can we give them something that is like, I don't know, 90% of the way there where then they can review, like give them the, a couple of steps up the ladder version. I think that's an opportunity to collaborate across institutions.
Great, thanks for that. And then before we go, again, please join the Slack channel that's on the screen. There's a QR code there. That's a great place to have discussion, to spur discussion, and perhaps contribute to a impending playbook. Great, thank you so much, Brandon. This has been great. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Thanks so much.